Hi, I'm Alaya Dawn Johnson. I am here in San Pedro Musgos, my new home, and I'm going to show you guys one of my favorite walks in town. So follow me. So I moved here 3 months ago with my partner. This is his hometown. We had been living in Mexico City, but like a lot of things with the pandemic, everything changed. And so we both ended up having to really recalibrate kind of our plans and what we were planning on doing. Okay. So as you can see, one of the things about living in a new place is that you have to kind of relearn how to do a lot. Like the dishes, sweeping, and in this case, walking. I'm from big cities. I've never been much for hiking, and here, in any case, the hiking is kind of like walking. And you wear generally these farmer shoes. They're kind of like they're very practical. They have tires on the soles, and you have to step on the edge of them. These paths are really beautiful, but they're really complicated ground because they basically are kind of broken up, muddy in the rainy season when we are where we are now, or they're really dry and sandy in the dry season. And in any case, no matter the season, you are going to end up falling on your ass if you do not step carefully. And so, yeah, that sounds like a metaphor for something that I had to learn how to walk so as to not fall on my ass. Which let's just say I'm by no means an expert in yet. Oh look, I think these are some of my favorite. Speaking of things that I had to learn, you touch them and they close. They close. And so there's all kinds of wonders in a new place also. All sorts of things that you never understood or knew existed. You open yourself up to it. So that's kind of what I've been trying to do. As I said, I'm from big cities. And in big cities, I walk around a lot, but it's more on concrete or on more even ground. And now I've ended up, trying to figure out how to write while I'm here in San Pedro Musgos. And it's all super different because I used to wake up in the morning and decide, which coffee shop am I going to go to. That was my writing routine. And now I have to decide, am I going to write outside or inside? Oh, there's my dog, Kisantom, also, speaking of new things. And she's posing. And I really have had to just kind of figure out how to adapt myself to the rhythms of this place. It rains in the evening, it's very hot in the afternoon, it's cooler in the morning, so I wake up early in the morning, that kind of thing. And Lord knows, I don't think for anybody 2020 is going to be like their most productive year. I mean, who knows? Maybe it is for you. Definitely not for me. But I'm trying to just kind of like go with the flow and figure out, do what I can, but not push too hard, because sometimes you really need that downtime to refill the creative well. A lot of what we call procrastination, I think, really is just that kind of down space, that kind of quiet time that you need in order to be able to create later. And so that's what I've been trying to create here. Definitely sometimes I kind of like fall into this deep dark hole of going online and Twitter and video games on my phone that aren't very enjoyable for me, but I just sort of like keep doing them obsessively. But what I like about living here is that you can step outside, you can look at the sky. There's kind of these really dark clouds that come in. And you can kind of decide that things are different, and that, or see the way that life is different. So now you can actually see a little bit of town. There's like the church in the background. I think someone's selling this, like paletas, like on this motorbike. You can see the kind of materials people build their houses out of. The kind of curved clay shingles called tejas, and then corrugated tin roofs. Sometimes they're all even made out of asbestos, since that's not illegal here. So this is just a small part of town. I mean, it's a small town in any case, but they're just seeing a little bit. And I'm going to sit down here with this nice view and tell you guys a bit about my new novel, Trouble the Saints. Yes, I did drag it all the way up here. Sorry, machete. So Trouble the Saints is a novel that takes place in 1942 in New York City at the dawn of the U.S. entrance into World War II, and it follows Phyllis Green, aka Phyllis LeBlanc, a black woman from Harlem who's light-skinned and has passed for the last 15 years as a hit woman for the mob. And she has a kind of uncanny power in her hands. She and a few other people in this world, and it's not a lot of power. It's just something that gives her a little edge, a little unnatural edge. So in her case, she's a little unnaturally good at throwing knives, or actually really just aiming things, and she's chosen to throw knives. She kind of imagines that her role in the mob has been like a angel of justice, someone kind of apart from the more shady dealings of the mob, but at the point at which the novel begins, she's beginning to question her role in both the kind of small violence that the mob represents and the much larger, overpowering violence of white supremacy, in which she's very much participating as someone who's chosen to pass.
You have a novel and a short story collection coming out this year. Congratulations. Do you know when you start writing a story what length it may be, what form it may take?
So actually this novel is a fabulous book to use to demonstrate that I do not always know, because this began as a novella. The first section is a 3-part story structure. Hola, Kisantom. I should mention that her name, Kisantom, means blackbird or grackle in Amuzgo, which is the indigenous language that they speak in town here, which I don't speak yet, but it has 8 tones, so it's a little hard to learn for someone whose native language is English, but I'm trying. So as I was saying, this novel began as a novella. I wrote the kind of first section, and it ended in the place where a noir story traditionally would end, and then I realized that I just didn't want to end it there, that everything was weird. I couldn't quite figure out how to put a good place, or I kind of I didn't feel that it was thematically going as far as I wanted it to go, and I was really struggling for a long time with exactly how to make that work, until I finally decided, you know what, I think I just have to keep going with the story. I think I have to move past the point at which the traditional noir story ends with the kind of like harsh, bloody ending, and I think I have to show what happens after. What do you do after you've done this impossible, brutal thing? You know, what do each of these characters, how do they react to this moment, which you can call an inflection point, right? Like this moment where you realize that everything has changed. And I think that 2020 in general has been an inflection point for a lot of people, or really for the planet, you know. Not only has everything changed, but we've all realized it. And now we have to decide what comes next. And interestingly, in this novel as well, Phyllis, kind of after this inflection point, kind of goes to ground, or goes to seed. She goes to the country. She leaves New York City. And the story of kind of how she reinvents herself and kind of recharges and begins to create something new in the country is very much part of the story. And it's also, interestingly, something that I feel like I almost ended up writing into my own life.
I love the way your writing evokes a full view of each scene, each character, without drawing in all the lines for the reader. I don't know what P, Dev, Tamara, Walter, Victor, Trent, Gloria, Alvin, the kids look and sound like to you, but they are fully formed in my mind. Did you intentionally leave space for the reader to use their own imagination?
It's interesting because I feel that I've definitely never gone in for really kind of pause, character looks in the mirror, you know, admires her blonde hair or whatever. Sorts of character descriptions. Obviously that would be like just kind of ridiculous in general, but I don't tend to describe characters in terms of their physical attributes in any kind of explicit way. I think eventually I like to paint a picture more from the psychological viewpoint, and through other details you eventually kind of get an idea of their kind of physical picture. I certainly do leave a lot to the imagination of the reader. But it's not so much that I want to leave it to the imagination of the reader as that I want to be able to paint someone more from the perspective of how they are or how they imagine themselves or how they feel inside. And how you feel inside, at least like from my own perspective, I can only speak for one person, but is not so much, what I look like. It is not divorced from what I look like, but it's more about how I relate effectively to those characteristics that other people just see as physical characteristics. And so I like to attempt to describe characters in that way.
A lot of books are written almost as narrative screenplays these days, with mostly expository writing. You seem to build the story in ways only literature can, which is to say, giving us readers access to the characters' thoughts and their memories. Can you see this book as a film or TV series? And if so, which do you think best fits the story?
In general, I'm the kind of person who tends to think that novels work better as TV. That a short story has about the amount of kind of narrative content that your average 2.5 hour movie or 2 hour movie does. And that in order, not that there aren't brilliant adaptations of novels to film, but that in general, novels are more analogous to TV series, maybe like a mini series or something, because they just have more. They have more character development in them. They have more plot in them. Usually they just kind of are doing more. I think that'd be brilliant. But of course, in order to bring a novel to the screen, whether that be television or movies, you really have to change a lot. And especially in a novel like this, which as you mentioned, kind of has a lot of interiority. So how do you put that interiority on in a visual medium? I do not know. That's why I'm a novelist, but I would love to see it.
How much research went into this work, which is set in the 1940s but draws from the 1920s as well?
So, this novel is, definitely 1940s, but does harken back to the 30s and 20s. I did kind of waves of research for the novel. A lot of it involved reading novels written in the time period. Definitely Langston Hughes is pre the time period, but is definitely in the time period of the kind of youth of the characters. Nella Larson. I also read a lot of noir novels, Raymond Chandler. So the thing that was most important to me was to try to get a sense of the feeling of the place, not the kind of greatest hits of, what happened this year in 1942, but how were people thinking and dreaming in a lot of ways.
Trouble the Saints grapples with many different themes. One theme that really stuck out to me was how far we're willing to go to protect the people that we hold dear, whether lovers, former lovers, friends, families, or colleagues. Is the willingness to sacrifice a necessary part of love and friendship?
Yeah, I don't think that willingness to sacrifice is a necessary part of love. Certainly it's not necessary in the sense that you don't love me if you won't, hurt yourself for me. I mean, that's abuse. It's not love. I think that when you love someone, you do want them to be well. I think that is important. And sometimes, I wouldn't say that means sacrifice, but sometimes it means that you have to let them go, for them to be well. And that hurts, and so I think that you could kind of think of that as a sacrifice, but not necessarily. I think that these characters sacrifice a lot, not just because they love one another, but also because they realize that they've done one another in various complicated ways very wrong. And so the sacrifice doesn't come so much out of their love as their kind of pain and regret. It's a way that they are trying to make amends. The extent to which that amends is possible is, of course, extremely debatable, and the novel itself debates it. So I'm not sure, where I really come down on that. But I think that it's better seen as less an aspect of their love as an aspect of their attempts to be right with themselves and what they've done to the people that they love that they should never have done.
Another thing Trouble the Saints made me think a lot about was the global context for bonds between those grappling with the recent sins of colonialism and enslavement, and how the saints' hands and numbers were bestowed on a wide array of oppressed people, all against the backdrop of the United States entering World War II. Dev and his unit were seen as expendable overseas, fighting on behalf of a country that refused them their own freedom. Your writing does an incredible job showing how close we are to our greatest historical indignities, ones we have not yet overcome. Do you think a globalized effort is required in order to overcome colonialism and enslavement? Do you think we can overcome this moment and all that came before?
I think, provisionally, I think it can be overcome. I think, in a weird way, though we're at a very dark point in this timeline, we're also paradoxically in a moment where I think a lot of these deep, deep generational wounds can begin to be addressed. There's a lot more willingness to look at these wounds, to acknowledge the existence of them, to see the extent to which they have affected so much of our society in the States and globally. I think that gives me some hope, certainly. On the other hand, we're also in the midst of an unprecedented resurgence of fascism globally. So I'm not really sure. We really could go either way. In terms of the United States, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. But I do think that the kind of recent protests and civil disobedience and just groundswell of directed anger and demand for change does have a potential to finally address some of this. As long as we don't let it go or imagine that just, one election will solve these problems. It absolutely won't. I mean, this is something that has to be fought for every second. Black people in the States and oppressed people the world over have tried in a lot of countless thousands of social movements to move this needle a little forward. And I think that now we absolutely have to. The toxic and corrosive effects of the legacies of imperialism and slavery and oppression are poisoning the earth, quite literally.
Later on in the book, you write, "You are to witness, you are to hold them to the path, you are to be our voice in the world of the living." I don't want to give more of the plot away than you are comfortable with, but I would love to hear more from you on what debts we owe our ancestors for all the sacrifices they made before us.
So the debts we owe our ancestors, this is a heavy question. I think we owe them, at the very least, recognition of what they went through and what they sacrificed. And we owe them trying to make this world into a place that they fought for. They didn't see it, but we are in it, and maybe we aren't going to see it. I mean, it's unlikely that we're going to see a lot of what we're fighting for come to full fruition, but we can't just get our own and leave the rest. Well, I got mine and now I'm fine. I don't think that attitude honors our ancestors at all. And it certainly doesn't honor our children, whether or not we have children. I don't have children, but it doesn't honor the ones who are coming after us either. And I think we have to look backwards and forwards. And I think we have a debt. We have a debt to those who came before us and those who are going to come after us. And I think we have to really treat that debt as sacred. So what that means is at the very least not negating our history, not denying our history, and not denying our present reality, and understanding our present reality in so many ways really is fundamentally dependent on us actually having a deep, nuanced view of history. And that, of course, is sadly lacking in so much of the United States right now, and I think that really, really makes it really hard to have kind of a decent discourse about a lot of these issues. Well, I mean, yeah, I think it's fundamental.
There are so many powerful moments in this book, and you have an incredible gift for tackling big themes and ideas with seemingly simple language. For example, Tamara had thought that passing made Pea's life easier, but now she could see how it had separated her from her family, from the world she belonged in. And, not much later, all that power they'd collected between them, all that cowing strength, saint's hands, an oracle's deck, a mobster's gun, useless, useless. This was power. Jack of diamonds, running milky hands through thinning hair, going home to dinner that evening, drinking a scotch to relax, and never once thinking, I killed a woman today. Without giving up too much plot, did you know Dev, Tamara, or Pea's fates or history from the start? Have you imagined Durga's future?
It's interesting. Even though I began this as a novella, and so I had formally only written up to the end of the first section, that was the story I knew. I honestly had an idea of where it was going to go. I think that was probably why I couldn't leave it alone, because I just kept kind of thinking of the story. So by the time I started writing the second story, which is from Dev's point of view, I did have an idea of where it had to go. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it. So like, try not to spoil here. Like, I wasn't sure I'd be able to follow through. I think I kind of hoped that I'd find maybe a way out as I wrote the story. But yeah, I had a general idea. And have I imagined Durga's future? Yeah, that's kind of, I mean, it's basically, I imagine Durga's future because I think about the civil rights movement of the 60s. I think about my parents and how they lived through that, and how they tried so hard to bring about change, and they did. They absolutely did, but it didn't go far enough. And that's not to say, like, oh, shame on them. I mean, it went as far as they could take it. And so I think part of what's hard or interesting about Durga is that she's there at the end as this kind of hopeful beacon, but we know that what her generation did was so much. But now, people of my generation and Generation Z, and hopefully the even younger kids, are going to have to take up this mantle again. And it's extremely urgent now, if anything, even more urgent than it was then. So I think, in some ways, I think of Durga's future as a kind of open question, because her future is still our future. And we have to kind of decide what we're going to make of it. Thanks so much to 20 Summers for giving me this opportunity to speak with all of you guys. And now I am going to do my best to get down this hill without falling on my ass. Bye.